In the intricate tapestry of governance, the concept of legitimacy emerges as a guiding principle, anchoring societies in stability and order. Yet, in the turbulent currents of revolution, where established structures are upended, questions of legitimacy take on a profound significance. How does a regime born out of upheaval and defiance assert its authority in the absence of traditional frameworks? The case of the Maurice Bishop's regime in Grenada offers a compelling paradox where the rule of law and legitimacy seem paradoxically entwined. Here lies the philosophical depths of governance, probing the complexities of power, authority, and the elusive nature of legitimacy in times of upheaval.
The short-lived reign of the RMC came to a dramatic end on the morning of October 25, 1983, when 500 airborne Rangers and U.S. Marines landed at the Point Salines Airport at the southeastern point of Grenada.
A very warm welcome to this, the 20th episode of Resilience of the Spice Isle, where we examine the intricate evolution of Grenada's political history. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for joining us. In our last episode, CBC's journalist Mohammed Saeed, who journeyed to Grenada on the morning of March the 13th, 1979, and witnessed the first day of the revolution, he shared his experiences, emphasizing the fundamental role of the corporation in keeping Grenadians and Barbadians abreast of the developments there. In this week's episode, we shall examine the legitimacy of the entire revolution, the governance of Grenada from March 13, 1979 to October the 25th, 1983. It poses a significant question about legitimacy and the rule of law. Those of us familiar with the Westminster style of government still ponder, how did Grenada function without a parliament and a court system as we knew it? These questions will be answered in this episode by an attorney at law. But we begin first of all with then Prime Minister Maurice Bishop as he contextualized his new government.
Grenada is in the midst of a revolutionary process. There are people who would like to pretend that what took place on the 13th of March was nothing unusual. We know different. It was unusual. It was a fundamental break with the past, certainly in terms of the method by which power can be transferred in this region, the English-speaking Caribbean. We regard that we are building a revolutionary process that has fundamental implications for those who have been accustomed to exploiting the region for profits, and it also has fundamental implications for a tiny minority of parasites in our society who believe that workers have no rights, who believe that they have the right to hijack prices on a daily basis, who believe they're above the law. We do not accept these assumptions. It also has fundamental implications for certain elements in the mass media, in the Caribbean and indeed internationally. Because one of the assumptions that we are challenging, and we are very serious about this, is the whole concept of a free and responsible press in the context and in the manner in which that is defined, has been defined by the colonialists. We reject that definition altogether. Naturally, we expect the criticisms, we expect the attacks. But those who have any doubts about popularity, let them come to Grenada, let them spend 3 or 4 days. I have no doubt they will see the reality.
Now, how was all of that possible? How was Maurice Bishop and his new dual movement able to function as a legitimate government of Grenada? Attorney at law Shaquille Newton employs an established theoretical framework to examine the legitimacy of the revolution.
Before I begin, I wish to acknowledge and pay respect to the late Professor Simeon McIntosh. He was a great Grenadian who was Professor of Law and Jurisprudence at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. And his academic work on the Grenadian Revolution, in particular his legal analysis of the Grenadian Revolution, is foundational and one upon which I hope to build. When I think of the Grenadian Revolution, I think of one of the most fascinating legal events that ever occurred within the shores of the Commonwealth Caribbean. Fascinating in the sense that it gave rise to deep philosophical questions of the rule of law, good governance, democracy, and the self-determination of a people. At the heart of this revolution, and well, really at the heart of any revolution, is the question of what turns a group of insurrectionists into the legitimate government of the day. The Austrian theorist Hans Kelsen, in his theory of revolutionary legality, attempts to answer this question. Central to Kelsen's theory of revolutionary legality hinges the two concepts of, first, the Grundnorm, and the principle of efficacy. The Grundnorm may be considered to be the basic rule upon which a state, or put more philosophically, a polity, is based. And efficacy is the extent to which persons recognize the Grundnorm, feel compelled to comply with the laws made under the Grundnorm, and the institutions which flow naturally from the Grundnorm. Applying all of this to the context of Grenada, prior to the revolution, the 1974 Independence Constitution of Grenada can be considered to be the Grundnorm within Grenada. This constitution impliedly set up the three arms of government, those being the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. And most importantly, under Section 38, would have granted to the Parliament of Grenada the power to make laws for the peace, good governance, and order of Grenada. The citizens recognize this constitution as being supreme. In fact, by virtue of the Supreme Law Clause, this constitution declared itself to be supreme, and any other laws which were made were valid to the extent that they were compatible with this constitution. And the citizens of Grenada also felt compelled to comply with the laws that were made under the authority of this constitution. So therefore it can be unequivocally said that the 1974 Independence Constitution of Grenada was indeed the Grundnorm. Efficacy existed to the extent that the citizens of Grenada felt compelled to comply with this constitution, and therefore, at the time in question, this administration would have been the legitimate government of Grenada. On the 13th of March 1979, when the New Dual movement seized power via a coup d'etat, or put simply, via a revolutionary coup, it can be said that the Grundnorm in Grenada was broken. This is where things get a bit complicated and fascinating to think about. And once again, the question has to be raised: what turned this group of insurrectionists into a legitimate government? The first order of the New Dual movement was the suspension of the Constitution and rule by decree. When I say rule by decree, I mean that there was not lawmaking in the usual manner that you and I would know. There was no parliament where laws came to be debated before they went to be proclaimed. And they ruled by decree by virtue of People's Laws 1 to 10. In summary, the People's Laws vested all legislative and executive authority within the People's Revolutionary Government, retained Queen Elizabeth II as the head of state to be represented by a Governor General, removed Grenada from the West Indies Associated States Supreme Court, which is a precursor to the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, and finally declared that all the people's laws became valid upon announcement over Radio Free Grenada or upon publication in the official gazette signed by the Prime Minister. I find it ironic that these laws were called the people's laws when essentially the people had no say in the making of these laws. In the usual manner, elections are held, but this did not occur here. It would appear that the People's Revolutionary Regime conceptualized the law and then had all say upon the proclamation of the law and the effect of the laws upon the people of Grenada, and yet they were considered to be the people's laws. For instance, People's Law number 14 of 1983 established the National Insurance Scheme, which we all know would have a profound effect upon the lives of Grenadians. Yet no debate was had, there was no public consultation as to how the mechanisms of the schemes was intended to work, but it was implemented, and the people of Grenada felt a sense of, attachment to this law and complied with it. What is also striking is if you take a look at the enactment clause of these people's laws. From the perspective of legisprudence, that is the study of lawmaking, an enactment clause serves to show that all the constitutional requirements for a law to become valid have been complied with. If we look at the enactment clause of Grenada, it stated, "In the exercise of the powers vested in the People's Revolutionary Government by the People's Laws number 2, 1979, and in the exercise of the powers vested in the Prime Minister by People's Laws number 10, it is hereby ordered and proclaimed as follows." Then the actual content of the law followed this enactment clause. Having said all of this, it is possible to conclude with a measure of certainty that the People's Revolutionary Government did indeed become a legitimate government. It can be said that People's Laws 1 to 10 can be considered the GRU norm. These were the laws from which other laws flowed, and there was efficacy. The people of Grenada recognized People's Laws 1 to 10, and all the institutions and laws that flowed naturally therefrom from People's Laws 1 to 10. And to this extent, I don't have a difficulty with concluding that the People's Revolutionary Government was indeed a legitimate government of Grenada during the revolutionary years.
Quite similarly, Dr. Honeychurch is astonished by the widespread acceptance and presumed legitimacy of the revolutionary government.
So you have your revolution, you have your Marxist revolution, and yet at the same time you are maintaining the representative of the Queen. He's there in Government House overlooking St. George's, and that is going ahead in parallel to all the other stuff that's happening. And the fact, it's an interesting case because in constitutional situation, because the fact that Scone was there meant that the representative of Her Majesty the Queen was still basically the head of state, or the representative of the head of state, and the head of state was sitting at Buckingham Palace in London. So here was all of the revolutionary government taking place with all of the rallies and the propaganda and all the stuff that was going on. And Scone was still there. But anyway, he was the first person they secured and flew by helicopter to get on to one of the warships.
They had attempted to take the Governor General's residence, and because he was considered the only legitimate authority on the island, and he needed to sign that letter inviting them.
There's a report again today that your brigade commander in Grenada brought out a letter from him on Tuesday which effectively requested the intervention that was already underway.
The intervention was underway at the time when Brigadier Lewis brought out the request, obviously because Brigadier Lewis was a part of the intervention. You see, the situation with the Governor-General was a very tense one. Government House was surrounded. He was in the hands of soldiers, and as you probably know, there was a very intensive fight for his person. It was eventually during the intervention surrounded by armored cars who besieged the small special unit that was inside, trying to secure him.
That's why there's a whole controversy about backdating the letter, which I don't think there is really an argument there. I think he spoke to them and supported them. I don't really think, that the whole issue of the backdated letter was, they just needed a piece of paper and he signed it whenever.
In fact, I believe that there is a fair amount on record already indicating that Sir Paul Scoon was approached and asked to make his views known, and he made his views known, indicated that there would be an invitation, but he was unable to issue it and have it publicized while he was still virtually a prisoner of the military regime. I believe the chairman of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States has already said this at the United Nations, and I have nothing to add to it except to say that her statement accords with my recollection.
But that was difficult because the attempt to rescue him took a lot longer, and in the fight to get into his residence and stuff like that.
With Scoon secure, it meant that anything could happen, leaders could die, governments could fall, but ultimately the representative of the head of state was still there. And that's a key kind of interesting constitutional issue that kept the link. And it is one that is very important for all of our islands, even if we are republics. And that is why there are some people who would be hesitant to become republics, because it is the fact that you have a Governor-General who is representing the head of state. Ultimately, the head of state is safe. They're up, whether it's King Charles or whoever, they're there, and all kinds of upheavals can be happening in the island, but you still have a head of state in place. So that's a very interesting constitutional basis. And as we increasingly move towards republics, Dominica is already a republic. It was the first to become a republic on Independence Night. So there was none of this problem about shall we, will we, whatever. If you are in a situation like that, who is going to secure that president?
As expected, with any significant change, there are demonstrations and protests where individuals assemble at strategic locations to voice their displeasure with a situation or event.
Within the United Nations, there was demonstrations outside the UN. Why was Grenada invaded? When you look at the minutes from of the meetings held, you realize the majority of countries were saying no to an invasion of Grenada as opposed to yes. Conflict in the US Congress. Why are you doing this? It doesn't seem to make much sense. But be it as it may, we ended up with this invasion, intervention, however you want to define it as.
Basically, a large number of persons in the world were angry with Ms. Charles for supposedly inviting the United States to invade a country that was on the way to a dynamic revolution of the people. You know, this was how it was being presented. And she had her problems in London as well, because Thatcher was very upset. Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister of England at the time, was extremely upset that Reagan had not informed her before that this was happening.
Well, Ronald Reagan later telephoned Margaret Thatcher to apologize for the late notice regarding the involvement of the United States in the intervention in Grenada.
Hello, Margaret Thatcher, yes?
If I were there, Margaret, I'd throw my hat in the door before I came in. Listen, we regret very much the embarrassment that's been caused you, and I'd just like to tell you what the story is from our end out here. I was awakened at 3 o'clock in the morning, supposedly on a golfing vacation down in Georgia, and was there with the Secretary of State, and so we met in pajamas out in the living room of our suite because of this urgent plea from the Organization of East Caribbean States. We immediately got a group going back here in Washington, in which we shortly joined on planning and so forth. It was literally a matter of hours. When your word came of your concerns, by the time I got it, 0 hour had passed and our forces were on their way. Yeah. And of course the time difference made that it was later in the day when you learned of it, and for us over here it was only 5:30 in the morning when they finally landed, and at last we could talk plainly.
Would not speak for very long, even on the secret telephone to you, because even that can be broken.
Yes.
So I'm very much aware of sensitivity.
Well.
But the action's underway now, and we just hope that it will be successful.
Well, we are sure it is. It's going beautifully.
Well, let's hope it's soon over, Ron, and that you manage to get a democracy restored.
We want to put them kind of out ahead in helping in the restoration of a government, so there'll be no taint of big old Uncle Sam trying to impose a government on them.
Well, there's a lot of work to do yet, Ron, still, isn't there?
Oh, yes. Yeah, and
it'll be very tricky.
We think that the military part of it is going to end very shortly. But as I say, I'm sorry for any embarrassment we caused you, but please understand it was just our fear of our own weakness over here with regard to secrecy.
And more so Buckingham Palace, the Queen, because the Queen was the head of state of Grenada, and she had not been informed. And so the whole process of informing the people who were ultimately the power holders of Grenada had not been informed about this.
Did you or your colleagues who deputed you to act on their behalf make any contact with the Queen or any of her officials at Buckingham Palace, given her relationship to the state of Grenada? Did you tell her what was going on, what was planned?
No, I must say we didn't. Our channels of communication with London don't include secure coded channels. And in a situation that was as fluid as that, the Governor General himself represented the Queen. I mean, the person to communicate with the Queen would have been the Governor General. She's Queen of Grenada for that purpose, not Queen of Barbados or of the United Kingdom. And even though we have not communicated with the Queen, we believe that it is in the Governor General's place to do so. And we believe that he has communicated. It is, I think, it would not be constitutionally proper unless requested, and I've never heard of such a request, for one country to communicate to Her Majesty any matter relating to one of Her Majesty's Governor Generals in another country.
Anyway, that was sorted out. Reagan talked to Mrs. Thatcher and said, look, if we had told you there was a risk that it would get out, there would have been a reaction in Parliament in Britain, and this would have been basically exposed the plan that was going to happen. Anyway, all of that was dealt with, but Ms. Charles and the other leaders up to now, you know, you have people who don't fully understand the background of the situation, and you put up a picture of a group of them, like when Reagan visited, eventually he visited Grenada for one day to appear in public, and they have a photograph of them on the steps of Government House in Grenada, and you hear people cursing about those damn people and what they've done. But, you know, as I said, at the time, in the discussions that took place, and as a member of the party, ruling party in Dominica at the time, it was basically a question of, the situation has got so bad, we cannot send our own people, we could only send them after the United States had entered. because, as I said, I mean, some Dominican policemen and a few Defense Force people from Barbados and wherever, they would have been slaughtered, you know. So that was a reality. It was a tough time for Eugenia Charles. And then, of course, you have the tragedy of the bodies of the ministers and the loss of life and the mystery of other people who had been killed that day. And all of this fed into what was a very difficult situation at the time. And then, of course, the arrest and all the long process that was going on of the people like Cord and others who had been. And you know, the thing is that Eugenia Charles had been at a meeting just a few days before. I have a photograph of it with Unison Whiteman right next to her, because the interesting thing was, in alphabetical order, when you had a meeting with CARICOM or with particularly the OECS, there is, you know, A, B, C, D, Dominica, and the next in line is G, Grenada. And the Grenada and Dominica always sits next to each other. And here is a photograph, Unison Whiteman, and she's telling him, don't go back. He says, I must go back and be among my people. Don't go back. And poor fella, he was killed as well. So I remember also the fact that there were so many things I knew stuff was happening because I was at her home. And I knew strange things were taking place, but she would not mention a word, you know. She would not mention a word because she realized if anything got out the day before or even during the night, there would be issues. It would make things difficult for the landing party and all that kind of stuff, you know. I did a booklet on the life of Eugenia Charles, a small, very popular illustrated booklet, and she gave me a pile of photographs which I could use in the booklet. And in going through them, there was a picture of her in slacks and casual wear, but with, she had just got off a helicopter and she's landing on the deck of a US naval vessel. And she has the helmet on related to flying in the helicopter, and she's walking through, and senior members of the naval staff are in a kind of guard of honor welcoming her. And this is September the 11th. I see it written at the back of the photograph. September the 11th, 1983. And she has come to visit this war games that is happening out in the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Puerto Rico. So in hindsight, I'm saying, but this is just a few days, a month or so before the invasion. So obviously the US now have invited her to come, to be on board, to keep her informed about the strength and the preparations that are taking place in case. So I said, oh, Ms. Charles, but look at this one, and look at this and the date and all that, you all there. Of course, she cut me dead on that one, you know, she was not going to talk about it. And there was another photograph in the White House that there was this controversy, you know, with a guy called North, Oliver North. And I recognized him. He's sitting in this circle in the president's office with Eugenia Charles. And I'm saying, but Miss Charles, isn't this Oliver North? And once again, boy, she cut me dead and she said, I don't know. I don't know who that man is. I really don't know who that man is. So obviously there were all sorts of negotiations and things that were going on. And, but it was because everybody was a little confused that between the killing of Bishop and the invasion, they did not really know what move Grenada was going to take, and the United States was making its preparations.
Now, this series offers valuable lessons with a key takeaway being the recognition of our unique history's significance, which stands on par with that of any developed nation. The events and aftermath of this revolution underscore the importance of collecting, cataloguing, sharing, and preserving our historical narrative for future generations. Moreover, the series has shed some light on the extensive planning and preparation involved in the intervention, suggesting that there is still much more to uncover. And as we say here, perhaps the half has not been told. Fortunately, my team of Miles Eversley and Romario Hunt, together we have taken a step in that direction. This has been Resilience of the Spice Isle. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. The series continues next week at the same time.